Our enthusiastic skeptic, Gerald White, has much to say about these TV transmissions from the Apollo astronauts as he tries to clear up the misunderstandings. This is Gerald White's quote. "Over the past few months, I have received many emails from people asking me to comment on various videos uploaded by the pro-NASA side. Specifically, they ask me how can the Apollo 11 views of the Earth be a transparency over the window as stated by Bart Sibrel and David Percy when one shot shows the Earth vanishing behind the window. I explained this way back in 2007, but unfortunately it seems that propagandists' misrepresentation of the footage continues to this day. I am also asked how NASA got the cloud formations right if these videos were faked. Apparently, the cloud formations seen in the telecasts are similar to those seen by weather satellites. Firstly, the Apollo 11 crew made not one, but 4 television broadcasts during the coast phase of their alleged voyage to the moon. According to the spacecraft film's DVD, the first one was filmed at 10:32 GET, ground elapsed time, 10 hours 32 minutes after the start of the mission. The second was filmed at 30:28 GET, the third at 33:59 GET, and the fourth was filmed at 55:08 GET. The first, third, and fourth broadcasts were all a continuous video with no edits. But the second video, the one where the Earth clearly disappears behind the window, is just a jumble of random interior and exterior shots. The astronauts don't even appear in the same shot as the Earth vanishing behind the window. In fact, if you actually watch these in-flight television transmissions closely, you'll notice that the astronauts are never in the same shot as the Earth. The camera always blacks out or cuts away from the interior and exterior shots. In the film industry, this is called smoke and mirrors. Anyways, long story short, Bart Sibrel and David Percy discussed the 10:32 GET and the 33:59 GET telecasts in their representative documentaries. These are the 2 broadcasts that they say were filmed with a transparency. In response to the transparency claim, the 3022 GET telecast has long been flogged by members of the pro-NASA side over and over again as though all 4 videos were the same telecast, and not once do they reveal that it is in fact an edited video. For the record, I believe that these videos in which the Earth disappears behind the window were filmed in a CSM mock-up with an accurate globe on the outside. At the request of a certain YouTube user who has been confused by the pro-NASA side's representation of these videos, I am uploading all 4 from the start to finish. Secondly, as stated above, these videos have been compared with photos of the Earth taken by weather satellites in orbit at the time. Naturally, the pro-NASA side have been quick to call this evidence. This trait is typical among propagandists. They represent a piece of data or video that they don't know how to fake must be evidence that Apollo was real. Considering that NASA had many weather satellites in orbit long before and during Apollo, and that meteorologists have been using such satellite photographs to predict cloud formations and thus make forecasts for the week's weather, I'd say that's how NASA was able to get the cloud positions right in these videos. Thirdly, I have also been asked why Sibrel says that the telecasts that NASA sent him were classified when they were also available on the spacecraft film's DVD set. The footage that Sibrel received carried this title card, "This film of the Apollo 11 mission was produced as a report filmed by the Manned Spacecraft Center and is not for general public distribution." Furthermore, NASA sent Sibrel this footage in 2000. Spacecraft Films published their copy of it in 2002. It seems to me that NASA decided to declassify this footage after Sibrel leaked it. Gerald White has posted a video showing his opinion of the TV transmissions in which he also comments on the Bart Sibrel video, and he subsequently posted an addendum to this video. Now I need to admit that all this is quite complex and not that simple to comprehend. In the first video, Jera expresses doubts about the dating of the video as shown in this title slate. These doubts appear to be based on the date a newspaper article was published in Australia showing an image of the distant Earth from the Apollo 11 capsule, which Jera claims was before the actual TV transmission. In Jarrah's second video, which is titled Moonfaker Exhibit B, Corrections and Revisions, he attempts to simplify his point about the dating of the video. It appears to depend on how NASA count the first day of the mission as either 0 or day 1. I am not entirely sure what relevance this has, but I believe he perhaps is trying to suggest that the video may have been made some time before the Apollo mission and therefore must be fake. Well, it may not be as Jarrah sees it, as believer Steve Sisson explains. He basically says that Jarrah White is confused in his assumptions about the incorrect date of this video as he examines other sources for the dating. So it seems that we are tripping over dates. It would have been easier if NASA had actually used the dates rather than the hour count in the mission, i.e. GET, General Elapsed Time. What may be an important point made by Jarrah White was that whether they change the view between the Earth and the interior of the capsule, it always blacks out during the changeover. You never see a direct camera pan from the interior capsule view of the Earth view, or vice versa. Of course, this could simply be because they needed to turn off the interior lights while they staged the Earth view or adjust the focus of the camera. I have already made some comments on Bart Sibrel's video. It is unfortunate that the video is structured the way it is and that it relates anomalies that have generally been found to be erroneous, for example, the shadows argument and the ubiquitous crosshairs. The first part of Sibrel's video discusses the political situation surrounding the Apollo project. Similarly, he describes the question of secrecy and how it would have been possible, if it really was faked, to hide this from the majority of participants. You can imagine that our believers are forming a queue to criticize the Bart Sibrel interpretation of what we saw in the NASA video. Believer True Group provides a clever proof of the Earth view video was not faked by examining the cloud formations from a meteorological satellite photograph. He examines the photograph of the cloud formations above Hurricane Bernice, which was active at about the same time as the Earth video was taken. In the video, he makes a believable match between the cloud formations on the Apollo Earth video and those of the satellite photograph. You may recall that Jarrah White commented on this close match of cloud formations as follows. Considering that NASA had many weather satellites in orbit long before and during Apollo, and that meteorologists had been using such satellite photographs to predict cloud formations and thus make forecasts of the week's weather, I'd say that's how NASA was able to get the cloud positions right in these videos. Whether this could explain how NASA achieved the observed match of the cloud formations, I am not sure. We have further counter-evidence about Sibrel's video from a believer named Gampanda 2012. In this video, Gampanda 2012 counters Sibrel's claim that only 20 seconds of the Earth view was broadcast when he contends that in fact 30 minutes was actually broadcast live. The video goes on to illustrate how Sibrel was claiming that the video was shot through a circular window while in close Earth orbit would not look realistic when the spacecraft was so close to Earth. It also examines prediction maps for the times and shows a supposed close match to the cloud formations. Believer Greater Sapien also has much to say about Bart Sibrel's video in his two-part video series. He dismisses the first part of the video as not being very relevant to the evidence. He goes on to discuss the claims that the Van Allen radiation belts are an impenetrable barrier to man safely passing through, as Sibrel claimed. His point is that there were paths through the Van Allen radiation belts which are safe for humans to pass through. He also maintains, without providing any evidence, that 3 millimeters of aluminum, only slightly thicker than a roll of foil that you have in your kitchen drawer, would have protected the astronauts from dangerous radiation. I find this statement strange, as he is an evangelical stickler for wanting evidence, as he states several times in his video. I have never seen aluminum being claimed to stop dangerous radiation, have you? This is important because one of the main critics of the skeptics is that man cannot safely pass through the Van Allen radiation belts. If Greater Sapien has evidence to confirm his statement concerning the radiation protection afforded by aluminum, then one of the main objections of the skeptics could be readily dismissed. He correctly dismisses the parallel shadow anomaly, as we have already discussed ourselves. Maybe he was a student of my Miss Jenkins. Likewise, he dismisses the crosshairs anomaly, suggesting that it is as simple as a matter of image resolution. He makes no mention of the other possibility of the film-to-video scanning that NASA needed to do. He spends time to mention the absence of any blast crater, assuming it would be beneath a lunar lander. As we have discussed previously, any initial blast crater may be farther away, as the lunar lander had lateral movement just prior to settling on the surface. He mentions the no stars anomaly voiced by many skeptics. We have no need to cover that one again, but he does point out, as I did, that they did in fact take an astronomical telescope camera. He further states that the waving flag anomaly has been disproved many times, particularly on the Mythbusters program. I am not at all convinced that this has been disproved, as we have discussed at length in Video 10, Blowing in the Wind. Interestingly, he states that the video of Earth from halfway to the Moon, as shown in Sabrell's video, was a practice to ensure that the actual broadcast would look good. It was not a live transmission when shown to the public, but prior recorded by NASA and broadcast sometime later. This to me could have allowed NASA to have manipulated anything before it was actually broadcast live, if in fact it was actually recorded on board of the spacecraft. Finally, Greater Sapien concludes that Bart Sabrell's video does not in any way prove that NASA faked the moon landings. The believers have rather compelling evidence about NASA's visions of the Earth. This contribution from Lunar Tuner examines the now infamous video of the Earth from 130,000 miles away during the journey of Apollo 11 to the Moon. The contributor discusses this video and similar ones from Apollo 10, which are often ridiculed by the skeptics as having been faked. He examines the three methods for faking this video suggested by the skeptics. However, he goes one step further and examines the cloud formations on the Earth and compares them with a NASA ATS-111 satellite photo taken at the same time. The NASA ATS-111 was a space shuttle mission to the International Space Station. He makes a very convincingly match between the cloud formations of the two photographs. Naturally, the skeptics would question using the NASA satellite source to provide a NASA video, but that was always to be expected. Perhaps we have some semantic problem here, as what Neil Armstrong actually said was, "We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it is filled up with a TV camera." To interpret this as putting the camera lens directly against the window glass, as it's stated by Bart Sabrell in his video, is perhaps incorrect. What Armstrong may have meant is that they placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground. If you examine photographs of the exterior of the command module, then you will not see any circular windows. However, the hatch window was indeed circular on the inside. Jara White examines all transmissions of the video from the Apollo missions. Although Jara does not directly come to the point, I believe he is trying to demonstrate that the video was broadcast from Earth by NASA. Several things led him to this conclusion. Firstly, there is no direct transition of the camera from the interior capsule shot to that of the Earth, but the video always blacks out in between these shots. He also notes that while the audio is continuous, the video is not. It appears as though the video is edited and portions omitted, even though the spacecraft film's DVD is supposedly the full mission obtained from NASA. The implication of this is that the astronauts are in low Earth orbit and a pre-recorded video is being broadcast by NASA. It is interesting to note the comments made about faking the mission. There is one interesting conversation between astronaut and mission control. Mission control. This is a real testimonial to prove you were there in case there were any doubters. Astronaut replies, "Some people still don't." They seem to be over-eager to emphasize that they are in weightless conditions by having pens floating about the capsule and with the Earth view out of the window that they are attempting to prove that they were halfway to the moon. At least I believe that this is the point of Jara White's video. Next, we have another interesting video from the believer Greater Sapien as he presents an analysis of the Apollo 11 Earth view video. He discusses the claims made by some skeptics that NASA used the transparency of the Earth fixed to the window or shot the Earth in low Earth orbit through a round window. He convincingly shows that both of these claims are somewhat dubious. He then uses some basic mathematics to estimate how large the Earth should look in the video and asserts that the video was indeed shot from about 130 miles distance from the Earth and not in low Earth orbit as many skeptics have claimed. The points made in this previous video by Greater Sapien, in which he dismisses the window transparency claim made by several skeptics, including Bart Sabrell, is challenged by skeptic Richard Lionheart in a 3-part series of videos. Unfortunately, his presentation style is rather labored and exceptionally dreary, but let's hang in and hear his contribution. He has a great tendency to jump from one subject to another, and it takes him a full 3 videos to finally get to the point what he's trying to make. He claims that NASA didn't just use a single transparency to fake the video, but a combination of several transparencies and also models, something hinted at in Jarrah White's previous video. He has serious problems with Greater Sapien and his use of maths. In his second video, he says that the Earth should look much larger than it did in the NASA video, but doesn't really present the calculations for this, just shows some distances. Finally, in Richard Lionheart's third video, he gets to the point, at least he uses 3D modeling software to demonstrate, using this software, that the Earth should have looked at least considerably larger than shown in the video. I must say that it seems much larger than I was expecting. Also of great interest in this video from Greater Sapien. The first part of the video is concerned with rebutting the above series of videos from Richard Lionheart, but skips to time 18. Here he presents a computer model which he uses to check how the size of the Earth should appear in the capsule window at various distances away from both the Earth and the Moon. Again, quite a well-made and convincing video. The fact that Greater Sapien has shown quite convincingly the sizes that the Earth appears in the capsule window and the size the Earth looks when viewed from the Moon is consistent with what we are seeing in the video and photographs does not impress our skeptics. Their reaction is simple. If NASA did successfully fake these events, then one would expect them to have got the mathematics correct. This is a typical problem of trust that we encounter throughout our investigation. Wow, my head is really spinning with all of this claim and counterclaim about the NASA video of the Earth. Reflect on this. Reflection is the business of man. William Shakespeare, Macbeth. Laser reflectors. The laser reflectors that the astronauts placed on the Moon are a piece of equipment that enables laser light to be reflected and are technically referred to as retroreflectors. These retroreflectors are made up of tiny reflecting prisms similar to those you often see on road signs and on the rear of bicycles. These prism retroreflectors will always reflect an incoming light beam back in the same direction that it came from. We will show this later. The retroreflectors can be used for experiments to measure the distance of the Moon from the Earth by recording the length of time it takes for the laser signal to be returned. Remember, it takes about 1.3 seconds for the light from the Earth to reach the Moon. It may surprise and perhaps slightly worry you that we are slowly losing the Moon as it consistently moves further from Earth by about 1.5 inches per year, about the same distance as your fingernails grow each year. This just means that the future Moon holiday you are planning may get more expensive than you had originally budgeted for. Retroreflectors on the Moon. In the 3 Apollo missions, several laser reflectors were placed on the Moon by the astronauts and aligned towards the Earth as it appeared in the sky. As the retroreflectors are made of prisms and the angle relative to the Earth is not too critical, as the prisms will reflect light back at the same angle that they came in. Laser beams remain tightly focused on large distances, but there is enough dispersion of the beam that is about 4.5 miles in diameter when it reaches the Moon, which is on an average 240,000 miles distant, and about 12.5 miles in diameter by the time it returns to the Earth. The signals returned are somewhat weak, and only a few photons are received back. Therefore, the observations are made for several hours at a time, and the average of the measurements is then recorded. The retroreflectors placed on the moon's surface by the astronauts are claimed by the believers as absolute, explicit, conclusive proof that man did go to the moon and deposit the laser reflectors there. If it can be shown that the only way a laser fired at the moon could return a signal would be the laser retroreflectors must have been placed on the moon, then this would be a very important piece of evidence. In fact, there are three possibilities to consider. The first is that the Apollo astronauts did go to the moon and they placed the retroreflectors there. The second is that the laser reflectors were placed on the moon by some unmanned robotic craft. And thirdly, that you simply do not need laser reflectors to get signals back from the lasers fired at the moon. We will examine these scenarios later. Moon landing proof. First of all, we look at the evidence from the believers that the Apollo astronauts placed the retroreflectors on the moon. After all, you see them do just that in the NASA videos. Our first offering is from a believer, Robbie12345, who offers his proof. He uses the Apollo records to identify the exact date and time the astronaut Alan Shepard on Apollo 14 placed the retroreflector on the moon's surface. He then examines the records of the McDonald Observatory at the University of Texas for the 2.7-meter telescope which was used as a part of the lunar laser ranging experiment from 1969 to 1985. He shows that the first recorded laser ranging of the Apollo 14 reflector was just less than 7 hours after the astronauts had set it in place. For him, this is absolute proof that a man-made retroreflector is sitting on the moon at the Apollo 14 landing site. He concludes that it could only have been placed there by the Apollo 14 astronauts. For me, this does not necessarily prove the point. He goes even further as he produced an addendum video in which he notes that the moon wasn't visible to the McDonald Observatory and is able to narrow the possible time difference to only 27 minutes. While we can admire his mathematics, we perhaps cannot fully accept that this is absolute proof that man landed on the moon, as we will see later. The Mythbusters program featured a video on the subject to prove that man must have stepped on the moon. The Mythbusters program featured a video on the subject to prove that man must have stepped on the moon, and the Mythbusters are not the only believers who use this conclusive proof of the moon landings. One point that may be relevant occurs at time 3:09 in the Mythbusters video when the laser pointed generally at the moon only produces a scattered return signal. It is not until the laser is directed at the Apollo 14 site that a clear return is observed. This is also mentioned in the Astrobranch 2 video response to Jera White at time 4:25. How these retroreflectors work and what they are used for is extremely well covered in this video from Speaker from Bosk 1. We have a similar presentation from Smarter Every Day, which explains clearly how these retroreflectors work. Again, the assumed existence of a retroreflector is cited as undeniable proof that man walked on the moon. The skeptics do not think the logic of this dilemma is that simple, as we shall see. Three scenarios. In order to properly examine this problem, we need to examine the three distinct scenarios. 1. Retroreflectors exist on the moon and were placed there by the Apollo astronauts. 2. Retroreflectors exist on the moon and were placed there by some robotic unmanned mission. And 3. Signals can be bounced off the moon without any retroreflectors. For our first scenario, we have already seen that there are many believers who see this as the final proof of men walking on the moon. How else could the retroreflectors have got there? There are many scientific institutions around the world that apparently use these Apollo reflectors to measure the moon's steady drift away from the Earth. The believers ask the question, how else can signals be received back by the scientific organizations conducting these experiments if man did not land on the moon and place the reflectors there? Therefore, is it possible that this is not true? Our second scenario, that the retroreflectors were placed there by some unmanned robotic mission, is doubtful. We have no evidence that NASA sent any robotic missions to the moon to set down retroreflectors, although this could have been done secretly by hitting the precise landing spot for the subsequent Apollo missions seems hardly likely. We do know that the Russians did send robotic missions to the moon. Retroreflectors were attached to the Soviet Union's Lunokhod 2 rover, which landed in 1970. This would have been too late for Apollo 11, but not for Apollo 14. However, these robotic lunar vehicles landed nowhere close to the future Apollo landing sites. Our third scenario, that you do not need retroreflectors to bounce signals off of the moon, turns out to be a fact. The Massachusetts Institution of Technology and the Crimean Astrophysical University were both firing lasers at the moon and receiving a return signal in 1962, long before any reflectors were installed on the moon by the Apollo missions. In 2016, skeptic Jera White personally confronted Adam Savage of the Mythbusters team, and Savage had to admit that he knew nothing about the MIT experiments. Furthermore, he openly stated that the program was for entertainment purposes only, which, given that the program sells itself as being scientific, is somewhat anomalous. Also, both the American and British military were beaming radio signals at the moon and receiving return signals in the late 1940s. So, there is no apparent reason why signals, radio or laser, cannot be bounced off the moon with no special reflectors, providing that there is large enough collection dish on the Earth to receive the greatly diminished return signals. Do retroreflectors really work? There also seems to be some doubt among the skeptics as to whether the laser retroreflectors would actually work. In this vein, we have a few contributors from our skeptics. The first is from our skeptic Crow777, who is not convinced about the science behind the experiments. We have a similar offering from skeptic Christy Byrne, who also refers to a previous experiments long before retroreflectors were supposedly placed on the moon. Skeptic Hunchback also has doubts about the science behind the retroreflectors. He describes how unlikely it is that the retroreflectors are responsible for bouncing back laser signals, but more probably he suggests that it is the natural reflection of the moon's surface. Now we have a submission from Jera White which, among other things, makes an interesting observation about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. The LRO, in addition to the two high-resolution cameras, also had a laser instrument called LOLA, which bounces laser signals off of the moon's surface. This was used to measure the height of the surface to produce detailed maps of the moon's topography, ostensibly to identify safe landing sites for future moon missions. As Jera points out, this clearly disproves the "you cannot get a laser reflection from the moon without a laser reflector" cited by so many believers. Finally, before we close out this chapter of this video, we will let believer Astrobrant2 respond to Jera White's previous video. Astrobrant2 claims that Jera White's assertion that the lasers can be bounced off the moon without retroreflectors, but makes the point that the LRO is much closer to the surface of the moon at 50 miles, and consequently much more accurate. This does not seem to be very relevant, as the moon's distance from the Earth is being measured very accurately from the Earth, which is approximately 240,000 miles away. Geological wonders. Our peace shall stand as firm as Rocky Mountains. William Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 2. Meteorites. The 6 Apollo lunar landing missions brought back in total about 840 pounds weight of rocks and dust from the moon. These rocks were brought back to the Earth to be used for more detailed analysis and testing. Now, if these rocks can be proved to be genuinely from the moon, then the skeptics' whole conspiracy case may be totally blown apart. However, the Earth is already strewn with pieces of moon rock that have traveled here as meteorites, so how does one prove that the rocks actually came from the moon? If the NASA specimens proved to be rocks that could have come from the moon, then the astronauts may have been to the moon and brought back the moon rocks as claimed by NASA. The only other possibility is if they are proved to be genuine moon rocks is that they were brought back by some unmanned mission to the moon, but we have absolutely no evidence for this. We do know that the Russians did send a robotic mission to the moon in 1970. The Russian Lunar 16 probe returned to Earth with a minuscule 100 grams of lunar soil and rock. Our skeptics do not believe that the Apollo astronauts ever went to the moon, so any moon rocks produced as evidenced by NASA must somehow have been faked here on Earth. On the other hand, our believers say that the moon rocks are another ultimate proof of the Apollo moon landings. So our quest in this video is to try and establish the definite source of the NASA moon rocks. We will examine what evidence there is for the origin of the NASA moon rocks and whether they could have been faked here on Earth. Now, the problem we have is that identifying the properties of moon rocks is no easy matter, even for experts, as we shall see. It is a complex web of geology, chemistry, radiation, in short, a mixture of scientific disciplines far too complex for the average layman to comprehend. We can in no way hope to be scientifically exhausted, but we will try to follow the debate as best as we are able. Earth-flying meteorites. First, let us look at what we know about meteorites. For this, we will turn to Wikipedia, which defines meteorites as a solid piece of debris from an object such as a comet, asteroid, or meteoroid that originates in outer space and survives its passage through the atmosphere to reach the surface of a planet. When the object enters the atmosphere, various factors such as friction, pressure, and chemical interactions with the atmospheric gases cause it to heat up and radiate that energy. It then becomes a meteor and forms a fireball, also known as a shooting star or falling star. Astronomers call the brightest example bolides. Meteorites vary greatly in size. For geologists, a bolide is a meteorite large enough to create a crater. Many meteorites found here on Earth do come from the Moon. In this case, they are more properly called lunites. They are broken pieces of the Moon dislodged by other stray rocks from outer space impacting onto the Moon's surface. If they are flung high enough from the impact, then they can be captured by Earth's gravity and slowly pulled to Earth. When we say slowly pulled to Earth, well, it can take up to 10,000 years for them to get here as they circle around and around the Earth. It is estimated that 1% of the meteorites found on Earth are from the Moon, so they are a reasonably scarce commodity. Meteorites can be found all over the Earth's surface, some of which are thought to have come from the Moon, but proving rocks came from the Moon is not so simple. Before the Apollo missions, nobody really knew how such moon rocks would differ from the meteorites we find on the Earth. The science at this point gets rather complex, so you will have to take my word for it. A discourse from the Washington State University of St. Louis explains how complex it can be. One perhaps relevant paragraph from the paper is worth noting. Any geoscientists, and there have been thousands from all over the world who have studied lunar samples, knows that anyone who thinks the Apollo lunar samples were created on Earth as part of a government conspiracy don't know much about rocks. The Apollo samples are just too good. They tell a self-consistent story with a complex interwoven plot that's better than any story any conspirator could have conceived. If we want to find meteorites on Earth, then where should we go hunting? Well, basically anywhere on Earth, but no lunar meteorite has been found in North America, South America, or in Europe. They undoubtedly exist, but the probability of finding a lunar meteorite in a temperate environment is incredibly low. Many experienced meteorite collectors have been looking, but have not yet succeeded. It seems that the best places to find lunar meteorites are in arid deserts with little organic growth to hide them. One such arid desert is the Antarctica, and the best time is summer as the ice melts and dark rocks become visible lying on the surface. You may be surprised that Antarctica is classed as an arid desert, but the truth is that it rarely rains or snows in Antarctica. The average annual rainfall is just 2 inches. Later, we will discuss a NASA meteorite collection expedition to Antarctica which took place in 1967. This expedition is important in our story in that it forms the basis for the skeptics' claim that the moon rocks were simply Earth-lying meteorites collected by NASA and subsequently falsified to represent moon rocks.